He slid the envelope across the table like it was just another memo, like it didn't have the power to crack the floor beneath my feet. "You have 24 hours, he said, calm as ice water. Didn't blink, didn't look me in the eye. I didn't ask what was inside. Not then, because something in me already knew that this wasn't just paper. It was war. My name is Teresa Holloway. I'm 48 years old, and this is the story of how I learned that silence can be louder than revenge. It was a Friday in late October. That kind of fall day when the air cuts like truth, sharp, dry. The kind of day that makes your bones ache before you realize winter's already packing its bags. Chicago smelled like burnt leaves, diesel fumes, and the sweet ghost of summer, trying not to die. Inside Millbridge Mutual, the hum of the fluorescent lights was steady as a heartbeat. My desk sat in the West Wing. 4th floor, HR operations, 2 monitors, a framed photo of Mom at her church picnic, and a tiny fake plant I'd kept alive for 5 years with weekly dustings and affirmations. 19 years, 4 months, and 11 days. That's how long I'd given this place. I knew every extension, every printer that jammed, every intern who thought they could outsmart the copy machine. I'd started in the basement, claims filing. That room always smelled like wet paper and toner, like ambition and mildew at the same time. I was the girl who said yes when others said, "That's not my job." Took night classes at Triton College, sat in lecture halls smelling like reheated coffee and determination. I studied HR law while washing uniforms for my daughter's softball games, balancing hope on 3 hours of sleep. I climbed my way up one memo, one spreadsheet, one performance review at a time, and I didn't get that corner office because someone gave it to me. I earned it. Every late night, every "Teresa, can you help real quick?" When I already had 5 fires burning, I said yes. I showed up. I showed out. Then came Garrett Langston, fresh off a messy divorce and a stint at some startup in Seattle that folded faster than origami. Mid-40s, wore quarter-zip sweaters like they were armor. Always had a smartwatch he kept checking like his pulse depended on it. He was charming, in that slick, empty way. The kind of man who complimented your attention to detail while erasing you in the same sentence. He called me T. First week, didn't ask, just decided, like I was some friendly office mascot. Then came the changes, subtle at first. Meetings I used to lead became team syncs. Emails I sent started getting lost. He'd say, "Let's keep this casual," but somehow the casual never included me, and the interns I'd trained, those same ones who once looked to me for guidance, were suddenly his new vision hires. The pattern was quiet but deliberate. I knew what it was, but I also knew better than to name it. In places like Millbridge, a Black woman who names it doesn't get justice. She gets labeled difficult, angry, uncooperative. So I stayed polished, pressed hair, clean lines, pearl studs. Let them underestimate me, because silence has power when it's strategic. Then came that Friday. Garrett appeared at my cubicle wall, tapping lightly with his knuckle, smiling like he was doing me a favor. "Got a quick thing for you, T." Quick thing, that's what he called it. I followed him down the hall. The carpet swallowed our footsteps. His office smelled like new furniture and cheap ambition. The blinds were drawn, the laptop closed. He didn't ask me to sit, just leaned back in that ergonomic chair, fingers steepled like he was the pastor of some prosperity gospel I hadn't subscribed to. "I need you to take a look at this and get back to me by tomorrow," he said, sliding the manila envelope across the desk. The edges of it caught the fluorescent light like a blade. 24 hours. His voice was smooth, practiced, the kind that expected obedience. I took it. Didn't speak, didn't blink. My heels tapped out a rhythm across the laminate floor as I walked back to my desk. Each step felt like punctuation. Period, period, period. I didn't open it, not there. Something about it felt too personal for office air, too sharp to expose under fluorescent lights. So I slipped it into my tote, logged out, and left before the evening coffee even brewed. The city outside was gold and gray, sunset bouncing off glass towers, buses sighing at every stop. By the time I pulled into my driveway on the south side, the sky had turned bruise purple. Inside, my tabby cat, Biscuit, strutted across the kitchen like she paid rent. I fed her, kicked off my heels, and reheated Mama's leftover smothered chicken. That envelope sat on the kitchen table the whole time. Plain, flat, quiet. Like a secret keeping its own breath. By 8 o'clock, it was still there. By 9, the silence got heavier. So I picked up a butter knife, slit the top, and pulled out one single sheet. Voluntary transition agreement. Typed. Cold. I read it once. Then again. Voluntary. Like I'd raised my hand. It offered 2 weeks' pay, unused PTO, and a mutual NDA. As if 19 years could be packaged into a polite little goodbye gift. I checked the date. I had until 5 p.m. tomorrow to accept. If not, it would be considered declined. No explanation, no review, no reasoning. Just out. Quietly, efficiently. Corporate mercy, they call it. I sat there in the kitchen, that single page glowing under the yellow light. Didn't cry, didn't even curse. Just listened to the refrigerator hum and the clock tick. The disrespect burned clean through me. Not just the dismissal, but the cowardice of it. He couldn't even face me. Couldn't even say it. He wanted me gone. And he wanted me to make it easy. But I've never been. The easy kind. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I pulled out a spiral notebook from the back of my linen closet, one I hadn't touched in years. The paper still smelled faintly of lavender detergent. Inside were printouts of old emails, notes from past supervisors, and every thank you card from clients I'd ever saved. Evidence, proof, receipts. Because Garrett? He wasn't just arrogant, he was sloppy, and sloppy men leave trails. By morning, I was already dressed before sunrise. Black slacks, ivory blouse, red lipstick, coffee brewed strong enough to take paint off a wall. I dialed Renee, my old colleague from legal who'd transferred to another firm in Naperville. When she answered, her voice came through sleepy but sharp. "Teresa, you all right?" I told her everything. The envelope, the 24 hours, the fake smile. She let out a low whistle. "Girl, that's a quiet push-out. They've been doing that. Bet you anything your name been on a list since that merger last year?" Her voice dropped. "Don't sign a damn thing. I'll text you a number. Labor attorney, black woman. Don't play games." "Thank you," I said, my throat tight but steady. "Don't thank me. Just don't let them bury your years in paperwork." We hung up. I exhaled slow, the kind of breath that tastes like resolve. Then I called Sister Jolene, my pastor's wife. She answered on the second ring, Bible study noise in the background. "Baby, you okay? Do you still have your notary stamp?" She paused. "I do. You need me to come over?" "Not yet," I said, "but keep it warm." By 1 in the afternoon, I'd printed every document I'd need. Copies, folders, tabs. By 3, I'd drafted my own response letter. Clean, legal, professional, no emotion, just precision. And by 4:45, I was walking back into Millbridge Mutual. The air in the lobby felt colder. Even the receptionist avoided eye contact. When I stepped into Garrett's office, he looked up, surprised. "I thought you had until tomorrow," he said. I placed the sealed envelope on his desk. "I don't need 24 hours. He blinked. "You already?" I reviewed it, thoroughly. He reached for the envelope. I didn't flinch, didn't smile, didn't soften. The silence that followed was so thick I could hear the hum of his watch vibrating. Then I said quietly, "You'll want to read it before you file anything." And I turned, walked out steady. Every heel click against that floor felt like punctuation again, but this time it sounded like freedom. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a loss. It was a release. He thought he'd cornered me. But what he didn't know was that I'd been sketching the blueprint for my exit long before he ever arrived. Because power, real power, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks out quietly with receipts in one hand and grace in the other. He opened the envelope like it might bite him. Didn't say a word while he scanned the letter I wrote. 3 pages. Calm. Professional. Surgical. The kind of letter that doesn't yell, but leaves bruises anyway. In it, I declined the so-called voluntary transition agreement, quoted Illinois labor law, included a detailed timeline of my tenure, documented, signed, and notarized, dates of the trainings I led, the mentorship hours I clocked, the performance awards that somehow stopped coming once the leadership changed color. I built it like a case file, because that's what it was. Then I added something that made his jaw tighten, a summary of the internal pay disparity reports I'd had access to as part of HR. Every number, every anomaly, neatly printed in black ink, including the one he'd signed off on, the one where a junior associate, 6 years my junior and barely trained, got promoted with a $17,000 raise, while I got a mug that said team player. No emotion, no accusations, just math. I didn't threaten, didn't use words like discrimination, didn't need to. I let the numbers speak. They had sharper teeth than any insult. Garrett's eyes moved left to right, line by line. His Adam's apple bobbed. The skin at his neck flushed just enough to betray him. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie like it was choking him. "Well, Teresa," he began, voice dry as printer paper, "I think maybe we should revisit this conversation with HR present." I leaned my weight slightly on one foot, hands clasped loosely in front of me. "You mean the same HR director who took early retirement 2 weeks ago?" I asked. "Or the new guy you brought in from Seattle who still calls our office the Chicago branch, like we're some remote outpost?" He froze, blinked once, adjusted his sleeves like they might give him something to hold on to. "This wasn't personal," he muttered, eyes darting to the blinds. I smiled, small, tired, but sharp enough to cut. "That's the problem," I said softly. For me, it was. Then I stood up, didn't slam the door, didn't make a show. I just left him sitting there in that cold, over-designed office that used to belong to someone who actually believed in people. That weekend, I didn't rest. I rebuilt. My apartment turned into a quiet war room, coffee brewing nonstop, sticky notes blooming across the kitchen counter like petals of a new plan. I pulled out my old journals, dusty folders, a flash drive I hadn't used in years, performance reviews, volunteer certificates, emails from clients who'd written, "We couldn't have done it without Teresa." Things that reminded me who I was before the gaslighting. I opened my laptop and typed my name in a new document header. Teresa Holloway, MHRM, consultant, speaker, strategist. Then I called my niece, Jasmine, 26, whip smart, with a laugh that could make a funeral feel like a revival. "Hey, Auntie." "Tea," she said, chewing something. "You okay?" "I'm more than okay," I said. "I need a website." She paused. "For what?" "For my comeback." That made her laugh. "Say less. I'm on it." She built it in 2 days flat, and I'm between editing TikToks and managing 3 brand deals. Holloway HR Solutions, consulting, training, and corporate equity leadership. Built on 20 years of lived experience and proven results. She added a deep blue banner that read, "Centering Equity, Building Integrity." "Looks like you're about to invoice somebody," she said. "Baby," I told her, "I plan to." Then she added a testimonials page, and that's when the messages started coming in. Old co-workers, former interns, church folks, even 2 women from Millbridge's downtown branch. "Girl, I'll never forget when you fought for me to get that maternity schedule approved. You were the only one who ever listened. You trained me when nobody else would. You taught me how to survive that place." I didn't ask for those words, but I needed them more than I knew. Because when your light's been dimmed long enough, you start to wonder if maybe it was never that bright. But it was, and I was done letting anyone shadow it again. By Monday, the site went live. By Tuesday, a woman from the Joliet Chamber of Commerce emailed me. Would you be interested in keynoting our Women in Business luncheon next month? We'd love to have your insight on equity and leadership. I stared at that message for a long time, then smiled. By Wednesday, I had 4 leads for contracts, 1 from a nonprofit, 1 from a mid-sized healthcare company, 2 from local colleges. Meanwhile, Garrett? He was unraveling. Yolanda, the front desk receptionist, called me on her lunch break. "Girl," she whispered like we were trading secrets at recess, "after you left that man's office, he'd been pacing like he lost his wallet." I could picture it. Garrett, sweating under those soft-bottom shoes, whispering into the phone, pretending everything was fine while the walls started to close in. She kept going, voice hushed but grinning. He called legal twice. "You know that new kid from compliance? He looked like he wanted to cry." I could almost hear the panic ricocheting through that building like an alarm only guilty men can hear. Word got around fast, and once it started, there was no stopping it. Whispers grew into murmurs. Murmurs turned into stories. Stories became proof. Because I wasn't the only one. A Latina team lead from accounting, the one who'd suddenly been pulled from her project 3 weeks ago, reached out. A single mom in customer success whose hours got slashed right after she asked for FMLA leave. Even Brian, one of the only openly gay men in IT, emailed me from his personal account. "You didn't imagine it, Teresa. I've seen it too. I've got screenshots." And just like that, patterns started to appear. Faces behind the statistics, stories behind the policies. Every one of them had gotten the same envelope, Garrett's little paper guillotine. But mine? Mine had been the first to cut back. By the end of the week, corporate announced a routine internal audit. HR blasted out a company-wide email reminding managers about ethical best practices in personnel transitions. You could almost smell the fear through the pixels, but it was too late. Because once people start talking, really talking, silence doesn't stand a chance. Whispers turn into echoes. Echoes turn into records. And records don't lie. That Friday, I was stirring sugar into my coffee when my phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. "Would love to chat. Can we meet?" I stared at the message. Let it sit there blinking like it was asking for permission to exist. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then I typed, "Sure, you can book time on my consulting calendar," and pasted the link to my website. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Langston Garrett, 30-minute session booked. I didn't laugh, but Lord, I did smile. Because there's something poetic about watching the same man who tried to erase you reach out to your shadow, hoping you'll still help him find the light. He showed up to the Zoom meeting with that same half-smile he wore the day he handed me the envelope. Except this time, his collar was wrinkled, his voice was smaller, and his background was blurred, like he didn't want me to see whatever mess was behind him. There was a faint echo when he said my name, like even his Wi-Fi didn't believe him. "Teresa," he said, all soft, rehearsed, like we were old friends reconnecting instead of 2 people standing on opposite sides of a quiet battlefield. I didn't smile. Garrett. Just his name. Clean, precise, enough. He cleared his throat. Did that little nervous tap on his mouse pad? The one I remembered from staff meetings when he was bluffing his way through data he didn't understand. I want to start by saying, I didn't handle things the right way. With you. His tone wobbled between corporate regret and genuine guilt, but I didn't bother to decode it. I tilted my head, calm, steady. I didn't come here for an apology. You paid for 30 minutes. Let's use them wisely. That stopped him cold. His eyebrows twitched. He blinked fast, like a man suddenly realizing he wasn't running the meeting anymore. He reached off screen. I heard the soft scrape of paper. Maybe a notepad or a script someone in legal helped him write. Okay, sure. Right. He straightened, forced a laugh that didn't fit his mouth. We're, having some fallout. He said it like it was bad weather, like the storm came from nowhere. "There's been chatter on LinkedIn," he continued, glancing down at something on his desk. "A couple Glassdoor reviews, some morale issues. Legal is asking questions. And, well," he hesitated, lips pressed tight. "Your name keeps coming up." I let that hang for a beat, then nodded slowly. "I figured." He exhaled, relief flashing across his face, like maybe this was the part where I'd start comforting him. I didn't. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Look, Teresa, I want to bring you back in. Contract-based. Help us clean this up. Train our managers. Rebuild the culture." The way he said, "rebuild the culture," like culture was drywall and not the people he'd buried under his ambition, made my chest tighten. I sat back. Let the silence stretch. Let him feel it. Then I said, "You want me to help you fix the mess you made with the same voice you tried to silence?" His face flushed, just a flicker of red under the eyes. But I saw it. "It's not like that. But it is." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. Truth doesn't have to shout. He swallowed hard. His pen clicked once, twice, then again. The sound filled the silence like a nervous metronome. I could hear his breath catch in the microphone, short, uneven. Finally, he said quietly, "You were right. About the pay gaps, the exits, the silence." He looked small when he said it. Smaller than I remembered. I nodded once. Of course I was. Then I smiled. Small, controlled. The kind of smile that says the war is over. And I won. "I'll help," I said, "but on my terms." I reached to the side and lifted the one-page proposal Jasmine had helped me design. Sleek black header, white margins clean as polished marble. She'd formatted it like a brand statement, not a job request. Consulting rate $300 per hour. Minimum contract, 6 months. Non-negotiable clause. Full access to all manager-level training materials. And at the bottom, the line that mattered most. Millbridge Mutual acknowledges that the intent of this engagement is to address systemic organizational issues, not to execute a PR sweep. He read it in silence. The only sounds were the faint buzz of his desk lamp and the quiet hum of my own computer fan. I watched his pupils move left to right to left, scanning every clause like he was looking for an escape hatch. He didn't find one. When he finally looked up, the bravado was gone. We'll get back to you," he murmured. I nodded. "You do that." Then I clicked, "Leave meeting." The screen went black. And just like that, peace. That night, I brewed peppermint tea and sank into my couch. The steam fogged my glasses. Biscuit jumped up, curled in my lap, purring like she knew I'd earned the quiet. I turned on an old episode of Good Times, the one where Florida Evans held her head high even when the world tried to break her spirit. I smiled through it. Not because the episode was funny, but because it felt familiar. For the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of shrinking myself to fit into spaces built to hold everything but me. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for permission. I was defining the space, and I liked the sound of that. The next morning, my inbox lit up. Subject, agreement confirmation, Millbridge Mutual. I opened it slowly, letting the anticipation roll through me like thunder before rain. 4 signatures. Garrett Langston, Operations Manager. Carla Dent, VP of Compliance. Michael Beatty, HR Lead. Evelyn Reed, Chief Executive Officer. They'd agreed to everything, every term, every clause. No red lines, no counteroffer, just compliance. I sat there reading it twice, then once more for good measure. Not disbelief, just gratitude. Because this wasn't luck. It was alignment. The kind that only happens when you stop asking to be seen and start demanding to be recognized. And just like that, I wasn't Teresa Holloway, the employee, anymore. I was Teresa Holloway, founder and principal consultant. The same woman they once silenced was now billing them by the hour. The first day back at Millbridge felt like stepping into a memory that had finally learned its lesson. I parked in the visitors' lot, not because I had to, but because I liked the symbolism. I didn't belong inside their hierarchy anymore. I was there by invitation. I stepped out of the car in a navy blue pantsuit my sister, Laverne, had tailored just for the occasion. Sharp shoulders, cinched waist, power in every seam. My hair was freshly silk-pressed, parted to the side, the way Mama used to wear hers when she said, "Baby, let them see you coming." I walked through those glass doors slow, steady, deliberate. Every step clicked against the marble floor, echoing like a drumbeat. People glanced up from their desks. Some smiled nervously, some looked away. I didn't flinch. I was done being invisible. The conference room smelled like fresh polish and nervous energy. Same long mahogany table. Same flickering ceiling light they never fixed. Garrett sat near the end. No jacket this time. Sleeves rolled up like he was ready to collaborate. To his left, the VP of Compliance pretended to scroll through her tablet. Across from her, 3 department heads whispered like kids caught cheating on a test. When I set down my laptop, the room quieted. I waited a beat. Let the silence settle. Then I began. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Teresa Holloway." The words rolled out like silk but landed like steel. I spent 19 years in this building. A few heads lifted. Garrett swallowed. "I know where the mold is hiding in the walls, and today I'm here to teach you how to tear it out." Silence. Not the uncomfortable kind, the reverent kind, the kind that follows truth. I clicked to the first slide, a photo of a bridge collapsing halfway through construction. "Culture doesn't fail all at once," I said. "It cracks quietly. At first it looks like progress. Then one day the foundation gives out." Every eye was on me, the same eyes that once looked past me, and it hit me, standing there. How much strength it takes to return to the scene of your undoing and teach it how to rebuild. For 19 years I'd played defense. Now I was leading the offense, and they were finally listening. Because I wasn't asking anymore. I was teaching. I was leading. I was home, but on my own terms. The first few sessions were quiet, not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind, the kind that sits in your chest like an unpaid debt, the kind of silence that hums, full of guilt and unspoken memories. Everyone sat too straight in their chairs, hands folded neatly, eyes darting everywhere but at me. That's how you know truth is close, when people can't meet your eyes. I didn't mind. Silence to me has always been a mirror, and I was there to help them look into it. Each session started the same way. A deep breath, a pause long enough to make them shift in their seats. Then I said, "I'm not here to shame you. I'm here because shame already lives in these walls. I'm here to name it and clear it." I let the words sit, let the air change. Some squirmed. A few took furious notes, pretending the act of writing meant they were listening. Most just stared, quiet, polite, disconnected, waiting for it to end. But by the 3rd week, something shifted. It was subtle at first, the kind of shift that happens when people realize the mirror's not going away. That day, I told them a story. It wasn't in the presentation slides. It wasn't scripted. It was memory. Raw and still humming with the echo of old pain. I told them about the time I trained a new hire, a bright young man with quick hands and a confident grin. He was eager. I stayed late to help him refine his reports, coached him on his presentation skills, taught him how to hold his voice steady in a room full of senior staff. He'd thank me, smile, call me Ms. Holloway like I was his favorite teacher. A month later, I found out, through the grapevine in the break room over lukewarm coffee, that he'd been promoted to a position I'd never even known existed. My position, rewritten without my name on it. When I told that story, the room went still. You could hear the click of the air vent and the hum of the projector. No one breathed too loud. And that's when Devin, one of the younger analysts, barely a year in, raised his hand. His voice was quiet but clear. "I remember that," he said. "We all did. We just didn't know what to say. I looked at him, not unkindly. You didn't have to say anything, I said, but silence is agreement, whether you meant it or not. He lowered his gaze, nodded once, and just like that, something cracked open. The words began to spill, soft, uncertain, but honest. I thought you were too qualified for that role. I figured they had their reasons. I didn't want to lose my own seat. The confessions came slow, one after another, like pebbles dropping into deep water. I didn't interrupt, didn't coddle, didn't condemn. Just let them sit with the discomfort. Because growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in truth. When the air got too heavy, I gave them tools instead of pity. How do you name bias when you see it? I asked. How do you stand up without losing your job? I showed them frameworks, role plays, reflection exercises, because healing doesn't look like bandages. It looks like blueprints. Behind the scenes, Garrett kept his distance. We never spoke after the contract was signed. He'd appear at the back of the room sometimes, leaning against the doorframe like an outsider in his own story. He'd stay for a few minutes, arms crossed, pretending to supervise, then slip away before anyone asked him to participate. I never called him out. I didn't have to. Some part of him already knew. This space wasn't his anymore. Truth had moved in and it didn't have room for him at the head of the table. Slowly, the walls of Millbridge began to breathe again. Not overnight, but you could feel the air changing, brick by brick, word by word. They launched an anonymous reporting system, commissioned a full equity audit, not one of those quiet internal memos, but a public one, shared in company meetings. They created mentorship programs led by women of color, real leadership pipelines, not photo ops. The first time I saw one of my former mentees leading a department meeting, I smiled so wide I had to turn my camera off. It was working. It was slow, but it was real. And then the testimonials began to come in. Emails, handwritten notes, even a few thank you cards slid under my office door. Your session changed how I talked to my team. I finally stood up for myself in a meeting. I wish someone had taught me this 10 years ago. I printed everyone, not for ego, for remembrance. Because when you've been invisible long enough, you start thinking maybe the world forgot your name. Those words reminded me that visibility isn't about attention. It's about impact. And once you remember that your presence is power, baby, you never shrink again. About 2 months into the contract, my phone rang. Unknown number, downtown area code. Ms. Holloway? A woman's voice said. Crisp, curious. This is Amanda from North Loop Collective. We're a growing startup, and we've been hearing about the work you did at Millbridge. We'd love to bring you in to build our culture from the ground up. I looked out the window while she talked. The Chicago skyline glinting like a promise I finally believed I deserved. She asked if I had availability. I told her I was booked for another 4 weeks but could schedule after. There was a pause. Then she said, "We'll wait." That one sentence, "we'll wait," felt like confirmation from the universe that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. By the end of that day, my calendar was full through summer. Workshops, panels, keynotes, but more than that, purpose. For the first time in my life, I wasn't surviving. I was choosing. I was shaping the world that used to shape me. Every invoice I sent felt like reclamation. Every cleared check was closure. Every email that began with, "Your session inspired me," was proof. Proof that what they buried under their titles and silence had grown roots. That the woman they tried to push out had turned her exile into an empire. But the true shift, the one that made me exhale for real, came quietly. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was reviewing feedback forms when my phone buzzed. A text from Yolanda. "Langston out, official tomorrow, nobody crying." I stared at it for a moment, then laughed. Not a cruel laugh, a peaceful one. It wasn't dramatic. No grand announcement, no farewell emails, just a quiet exit. the same way he'd tried to hand me mine. Only difference was his was final. Mine had been a rebirth. That night, I poured myself a glass of sweet tea and sat on my porch as the city lights blinked awake. Biscuit hopped up beside me, purring against my arm. The air smelled like rain, clean, forgiving, alive. For a long time, I just sat there listening to the sound of the wind through the leaves. It hit me then. Sometimes revenge doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it builds. And sometimes it simply leaves and lets your absence teach the lesson louder than your presence ever could. The morning after Garrett's resignation, I stood in my kitchen, watching the coffee drip slow and steady into my favorite mug, the one with the tiny crack near the handle that somehow never leaks. The house was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. Rested quiet. The kind of silence that feels earned. The hum of the refrigerator filled the air like background music, low and steady. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows. Not fierce, just present. Biscuit was curled up in her spot on the sill, tail flicking lazily as she chased patches of sunlight across the curtains. I didn't rush, didn't check my email, didn't plan or perform. I just stood there and let the silence hold me, like a soft blanket that finally fit. Because that kind of quiet, the kind where you're not bracing for the next blow, that's the kind of peace you earn. I got dressed slow that morning, black slacks, cream blouse, soft gold hoops. Not for anyone else, for me. The ritual itself felt holy. I twisted my hair into a bun, smoothed the edges with a steady hand, then pinned my grandmother's gold brooch on my lapel. It caught the light just right, glinting like a private crown. She used to say, "You walk different when your ancestors are watching." And I believed her. Because that morning, as I slipped on my shoes and glanced at my reflection, I swear I saw all of them. Mama, Granny, every woman who ever bit her tongue to keep her job, standing behind me, nodding. When I walked into Millbridge that day, the air felt different, lighter. Even the building seemed to breathe easier, like it finally understood what accountability smelled like. The front desk receptionist, a young woman named Leah who used to avoid eye contact like it was contagious, looked up and smiled. "Morning, Ms. Holloway," she said, voice warm, genuine. No stiffness, no performance, just real. I smiled back. "Morning, baby." Upstairs, the conference room was already half full. The chatter was soft but alive. Folks exchanging small talk, pouring coffee, flipping through the printed handouts I'd laid out the night before. There was rhythm now, the kind you only get when people finally start believing that change isn't just coming. It's already here. Right before the session began, Deshaun, one of the new IT managers, walked up with a manila folder in his hand. "Ms. Holloway," he said, clearing his throat, "this was left on your temporary desk, no name on it." I raised an eyebrow. "Thank you." When he walked away, I opened it. Inside was one sheet of paper, handwritten, clean, even letters. "You didn't just survive, you changed the weather." My throat tightened. I read it twice. No signature, no clue who wrote it. Didn't matter, because sometimes you don't need to know who saw you, only that someone did. The workshop that day was about boundaries, not the surface kind, not turn off your email after 6 p.m. Boundaries, the deep kind, the invisible lines that tell a workplace what kind of soul it has. We talked about how policies mean nothing if people aren't trained to honor them, how respect isn't a checkbox, it's a culture. The energy was different now. People leaned in. They didn't flinch at hard truths. They asked questions that mattered. How do I call something out without being labeled difficult? What do I do if I am the problem? How do I make space without giving up my seat? I told them, silence is a choice, but so is courage. Every time you walk into a room, you build a space. With your presence, your words, or your quiet, you get to decide which one it'll be. When I finished, the room stayed still. Not heavy, not guilty. Still, like collective understanding had finally landed. That weekend, I flew to Atlanta for a leadership conference. The hotel lobby buzzed with laughter and perfume and power. Black women in blazers and bright lipstick, heels clicking across marble floors like thunder made of ambition. It felt like home. I gave my talk on equity and resilience to a packed ballroom. The lights were bright, the air electric. When it was over, one of the organizers, a young woman with box braids and a red notebook, pulled me aside. She said she'd followed my story online, said her cousin used to work at Millbridge under Garrett. She'd left quietly 2 years ago. Never told anyone why. But after hearing my story, she told her family, named it, healed it. The organizer's eyes shined when she said, "You gave her language for what happened." That night, sitting on the edge of my hotel bed, I cried. Not from sadness, from release. Because for the first time in my adult life, I realized I didn't owe the world a watered-down version of myself. I could tell the truth and still be whole. When I came back to Chicago, there was an email waiting for me. Subject line, "Thank you," from the CEO. I clicked it. He thanked me, not just for the results, but for the example. Said my work had reshaped the company's foundation. Said they were creating a permanent leadership development position and wanted me to help design it. I smiled. Then I politely declined. Not because I wasn't honored, but because I knew better than to stay planted in soil I'd already outgrown. I'd already tilled the ground. It was time to sow new seeds elsewhere. My last day at Millbridge felt like a quiet victory. They held a farewell reception in the atrium. Nothing fancy, just sheet cake, fruit trays, and sparkling water in plastic cups. But the crowd? It wrapped around the room. People I hadn't seen in months, folks who'd left quietly, folks who were still there, still pushing, still believing. As I walked in, the applause started. Not wild, not performative, just warm, honest, like closure. I stepped up to the little podium they'd pulled out of storage. The mic crackled once. I looked around the room, faces that had once looked past me now meeting my eyes, and I said, "Y'all tried to bury me, but I wasn't a file to be closed. I was soil, and look what grew." Silence fell. Deep, sacred. Then someone in the back said, "Say that again." And the clapping started, slow, then stronger, until it filled the whole atrium like a heartbeat. That night, back home, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and sat in my office. The city lights shimmered through the blinds. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the original envelope, the one Garrett slid across the table like it was nothing. I smoothed it flat on the desk, ran my fingers along the crease. I thought about burning it once, shredding it, erasing it like it never happened. But I didn't. Instead, I framed it, hung it right above my desk, gold frame, white mat, a symbol, a scar turned scripture. Because sometimes the very thing they think will break you becomes the proof of your rise. Now, every time I look at that frame, I remember the lesson that cost 19 years to learn. You don't have to beg for power. You build it. You don't wait for permission. You become the permission. And when they try to write your ending, you pick up the pen and start a new chapter in your own handwriting. Because revenge doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like peace. Like coffee dripping slow in the morning. Like sunlight curling around a cat's tail. Like a woman who finally knows her worth and doesn't apologize for it. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.